Before the first drum called the village awake, they sent her to the river with a leaking calabash, not to fetch water, but to keep her away long enough for everything she owned to be stolen. The path was still black with night. The reeds trembled in the wind. Even the birds had not started singing yet. And the woman who pushed her out of the house, the woman who wore her late mother's bracelets as if they belonged to her, stood in the doorway and watched without blinking. But what Nia did not know that morning was that another traveler was already moving through that same forest. He was not a hunter. He was not a trader. He was a prince, riding in silence before sunrise, and the moment he saw the girl by the river, holding a vessel that could never hold water, the secret that had been buried in her father's house began to crack open. By the time the sun rose above the trees, one girl's suffering, one family's deception, and one kingdom's hidden injustice had all begun moving toward the same ending. And when the truth finally stood in daylight, the people who had tried to erase her were the ones who could no longer hide. If you love emotional African stories filled with betrayal, destiny, justice, and unforgettable endings, stay to the very end, because what happens to Nia will change everything. The village of Bukuru lay between dry hills and a river that curved around it like a dark arm. In the rainy season, the earth smelled sweet and alive. In the dry season, dust sat on the leaves and on the roofs and on the shoulders of people who worked from dawn until stars. It was the kind of village where everyone knew who had planted which tree, who had married for love, who had married for comfort, and which homes still carried old grief like smoke in the walls. Nia had grown up in one of those homes. Her mother, Adana, had once been known across 3 villages for 2 things: the blue dye she made from indigo leaves, and the calm in her voice. People said Adana could stop an argument without lifting her hand. She could make a crying child sleep by touching the child's forehead once. She was the kind of woman whose presence made a house feel complete. Then fever came in one wet season and took her in 4 nights. Nia was 10 when it happened. Her father, Kasim, had never fully returned from that loss. He was a skilled leather worker, a patient man whose hands could turn hide into sandals, belts, saddlebags, and ceremonial straps so fine that chiefs came from neighboring lands to buy from him. But grief hollows some men quietly. They continue breathing, continue eating, continue speaking, but something inside them sits down and never rises again. For years, it was only Kasim and Nia in the house near the baobab tree. He worked, she helped. They survived. Then Zola arrived. She came with perfume, with soft speech, with polished respect, and with the careful smile of a woman who had studied weakness before entering a room. She told Kasim she understood loneliness. She told the neighbors she would treat Nia like her own. She told the old women in the market that a child without a mother needed another woman's protection. That was the first lie. 3 years after Zola married Kasim, the house no longer felt like Nia's home. Nothing brutal happened where neighbors could point and say, "There, that is evil." Zola was too clever for that. What she practiced was slower. Nia's meals became smaller. Her chores became longer. The nice wrappers were given to Zola's niece. Adana's carved wooden box was moved out of reach. And whenever visitors came, Zola would call Nia that stubborn girl with a tired smile, as though she were carrying a difficult burden nobody appreciated. Kasim noticed more than he admitted. But Zola had mastered the art of exhausting a man before confronting him. Every complaint reached him when he was tired, hungry, uncertain, or ashamed of his own helplessness. By the time he might have spoken up, the moment had passed, and silence had chosen him again. Nia learned to live inside that silence. She spoke less. She listened more. She learned how to carry pain without letting it spill. She walked each evening to the old baobab behind the compound and pressed her hand against its trunk, just as her mother once taught her. "Trees do not shout when the axe is near," Adana had told her. "They stand. And sometimes standing is its own kind of victory." So, Nia stood. She stood through hunger. She stood through insults. She stood while pieces of her mother's memory were folded away, hidden, or claimed by someone else. But Zola wanted more than obedience. She wanted ownership. And Nia herself was the last thing standing in her way. What no one in Bukuru knew was that Zola had not married Kasim for companionship. Years before, Adana's family had held rights to a strip of riverbank land beyond the eastern reeds. It was not royal land, not market land, not village common land. It belonged to the women of Adana's bloodline, passed from mother to daughter as protected inheritance. Beneath that land ran a clear underground spring that never dried, not even in the harshest season. Whoever controlled it controlled water, dye fields, and future trade. Zola knew this. She knew it because her brother Sifu, a smooth-talking trader who moved salt, cola nuts, and gossip between villages, had heard of it from a corrupt clerk in the district records office. The papers naming the heir had never been publicly discussed after Adana's death. Everyone assumed they were lost. But they were not lost. They were inside Adana's carved wooden box. And the rightful heir was not Kasim. It was Naya. Zola had spent 3 years trying to get to that box, 3 years trying to weaken Kasim, and 3 years preparing to remove the girl whose existence made the inheritance untouchable. Her first plan had been marriage. Sifu had agreed to take Naya as his wife, despite being nearly twice her age, not because he wanted her, but because marriage would give them influence over any claims she carried. But Kasim, though tired and weakened, had delayed every conversation about it. Something in him still resisted handing his daughter to that man. So Zola changed strategies. If marriage would not move fast enough, paperwork would. That very morning, before the sun was fully up, Sifu and the district clerk were supposed to arrive at the house with a transfer document. Kasim would be told he had debts. He would be told his workshop taxes had accumulated. He would be told the only solution was to sign temporary control of the eastern riverbank into family management until repayment. He would not understand the document. He would not realize that one thumbprint could give away what Adana's mother had protected for decades. And Naya, the one person who might force the truth into the room, had to be gone. That was why Zola woke her before dawn. That was why she handed her a leaking calabash. That was why she said, in a voice as flat as stone, "Do not come back until it is full." A calabash split at the base can never return full. Zola knew that. And she smiled as Naya disappeared down the path. The river outside Bukuru was not beautiful in the way streams are beautiful. It was too wide for innocence, too dark for comfort. In some places it moved gently. In others, it pulled at roots and mud with a quiet strength that could drag goats, baskets, even careless men. Naya had been coming there since childhood, first with her mother, later alone. but never this early. Mist hovered over the surface like breath. The reeds whispered. The sky had only just begun turning from black to blue. Naya knelt by the bank and dipped the calabash into the water. By the time she lifted it, half the water had already drained out. She tried again. Again it leaked. Again. Soon her hands were wet, her dress was damp at the knees, and despair was settling on her the way cold settles on skin before dawn. She knew then that this was not about water. Zola had never wanted water. For a long moment, Naya sat back on her heels and stared at the current. A memory came to her then, not loud, not whole, just a piece of her mother's voice. When people cannot move a mountain, they try to move the child standing in front of it. Naya did not fully understand what Adana had meant when she first heard it. She was beginning to understand now. That was when she heard hooves. Not many. One horse. She turned. A dark stallion emerged through the mist, followed by a rider wearing travel clothes too fine for an ordinary villager, but too plain for a man eager to be recognized. He was young, broad-shouldered, and straight-backed. His skin carried the warm bronze of sun and lineage. He wore no crown, yet everything about the way he sat his horse suggested that he had grown up in places where people stepped aside before he spoke. He saw her. Then he saw the leaking calabash. And for a few silent seconds, neither of them moved. "I thought no one came here this early," he said at last. His voice was calm, deep, and careful. Naya looked at the river. "I could say the same to you." Something almost like a smile crossed his face. He dismounted slowly, as though he did not want the horse or his presence to frighten her. He kept a respectful distance. "That vessel won't hold," he said. "No," Naya replied. "It won't." "Then why are you trying?" She could have lied. She could have said it was all she had. She could have said it belonged to the house. She could have said anything. Instead, perhaps because dawn makes truth easier than daylight does, she answered honestly. "Because someone wanted me to fail for a very long time." The young man looked at her then in a different way. Not with pity, not with amusement, with attention. And attention, when you have been ignored too long, can feel more dangerous than cruelty. He walked toward the riverbank, opened a leather bag hanging from his saddle, and removed a polished water gourd sealed with wax. "Take this one," he said. Naya's pride rose at once. "I do not need charity." "It is not charity," he said. "It is a better vessel than the one you were sent with. There is a difference." She did not take it immediately. He did not push it closer. Finally, after a long silence, she accepted it. When her fingers brushed the smooth surface, she felt something she had not felt in months. Not safety, not hope. Something smaller. A pause in suffering. "What is your name?" he asked. "Nia." He nodded once. "Mine is Jelani." He did not tell her more. She did not ask. But when he mounted again and turned his horse back toward the trees, she noticed the ring on his hand catch the first line of sunlight. It was not a merchant's ring. It was a seal. And when he disappeared into the forest, the river seemed quieter than before. Nia told herself she would not think about him again. She told herself the gourd was only a gourd. She told herself men with fine horses and guarded names moved through other people's lives the way shadows move across walls, briefly, beautifully, and without staying. But the next morning, when she went again to the river, he was already there. He stood beside the reeds, his horse tied to a low branch, watching the current as if the water itself had called him back. "You returned," he said. "This is still my river," Nia answered. That was how it began. Not with declarations, not with music, not with the instant certainty stories like to invent. It began with conversation, cautious and incomplete. On the second morning, he brought roasted groundnuts wrapped in cloth. On the third, he asked who had made the scars on her hands from long work, and she said, "Life did," because some truths still felt too naked to name. On the fourth, she asked why he rode alone before dawn, and he said, "Because sometimes titles make more noise than thoughts." On the fifth, he laughed at something she said, and Nia realized she had not heard that kind of unforced laughter near herself in a very long time. On the sixth morning, she told him about Adana's indigo dye and how the women once sang while crushing leaves in wide stone bowls. She described the deep blue that stained fingers for days. She described the smell of wet dye cloth drying in sun. She described the wooden box her mother never let out of her sight. Jelani listened as though each detail mattered. That, more than anything, unsettled her. People listened when they wanted gossip. People listened when they wanted weakness. People listened when they wanted something to carry away and use later. But this man listened as if memory itself were sacred. On the seventh morning, he asked her father's name. "Kasim." "Only Kasim?" "Kasim of Bukuru," she said. "Leather worker." A shift passed over Jelani's face so quickly that another person might have missed it. But Nia had spent years studying faces for weather. "You know him?" she asked. "I know of him," Jelani said. And then he changed the subject. By the eighth morning, something else had changed too. Nia was beginning to notice that Jelani's questions moved in patterns. He asked about the eastern riverbank. He asked who collected workshop dues. He asked whether district officials had visited lately. He asked whether Zola's brother came to the house often. These were not the idle questions of a traveler. One morning she said, "You ask like a man carrying another purpose." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "And you answer like someone waiting to learn whether honesty is safe." The truth of that struck her so sharply that she looked away. On the ninth morning, he did not come alone. An older man arrived with him, walking with a carved staff and the slow dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime being obeyed without needing to demand it. His beard was silver. His eyes were sharp. "This is Mzee Baraka," Jelani said, "an advisor." Baraka bowed his head respectfully to Nia. "Your mother was Adana, daughter of Imani, keeper of the eastern dye fields." Nia froze. Nobody had spoken her grandmother's title aloud in years. Baraka continued, "There are records that should have remained protected. Someone has tried to move them." The air seemed to leave Nia's body all at once. "Who?" she whispered. Baraka did not answer directly. Instead, he looked at Jelani, and Jelani at last said the thing he had been holding back. "Your stepmother's brother has been meeting with a district clerk." The river moved on beside them, indifferent and ancient. Nia felt suddenly as though the ground itself had tilted. "What do they want?" she asked. Jelani held her gaze. "They want what your mother left behind." That same morning, before Nia returned home, Jelani told her the truth about himself. Not all of it at once. Some truths arrive in layers because too much truth at once can sound like danger. He reached into the fold of his garment and showed her the royal seal. "I am Prince Jelani of Kitembo," he said quietly. Nia stared at him, then at the ring, then back at him. The forest around them seemed suddenly too still. "You are a prince?" "Yes." "And you met me here every morning without saying it?" "Yes." "Why?" He answered without hesitation. "Because I wanted you to speak freely before my name frightened the truth away." Nia turned from him and looked out over the river. It was not anger she felt first. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of learning that even kindness can arrive with hidden layers. Yet beneath that, she also knew something else. If he had wanted to command her, he could have done it on the first day. If he had wanted to expose her weakness, he could have done it before witnesses. Instead, he had returned, again and again, with patience, with questions, with care. Baraka stepped forward then and spoke with formal clarity. "Years ago, the eastern riverbank was registered under women's lineage protection. Your mother's family held custodial rights. Those rights passed to you. A transfer cannot be legal without your consent." Nia shut her eyes. The wooden box. Adana's box. Everything rushed toward her at once. Zola guarding rooms. Zola moving objects. Zola insisting Nia had no reason to touch old things. Zola pressuring Kasim to sign papers he did not read. The house had not simply become cruel. It had become strategic. "When?" Nia asked. "When are they doing this?" Baraka's expression hardened. "Today." Nia did not wait for another word. She lifted her dress slightly and ran. She ran through the reeds. She ran through the low thorn path. She ran past cassava mounds and old fence posts, and the women starting fires for breakfast. By the time she reached the compound, her chest felt torn open from breathing. A stranger's donkey was tied outside. Voices were inside. And Zola was saying, in the smooth, patient tone she used when arranging somebody else's disaster, "Just press your thumb here. It will protect the family until the debt is settled." Debt. There it was. Nia burst through the doorway. "Kasim, do not touch that paper!" Everything stopped. Her father sat on a low stool, thumb inked, face drawn with sleepless shame. Beside him sat Sifu, smiling like a man already counting profit. Across from them, a district clerk held open the document. Zola turned slowly. The surprise on her face lasted less than a heartbeat. Then it was gone. "Nia," she said in false annoyance. "Go wash. This is business." "No," Nia said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "That land is my mother's line. You have no right." The clerk blinked. Sifu's smile weakened. Kasim looked from one face to another, as though waking from underwater. Zola laughed softly. "Childish nonsense." But Nia moved past her father, crossed to the shelf, reached behind folded cloth, and pulled out Adana's wooden box. Zola's face changed, not dramatically, only enough. Enough for everyone in the room to see that something real had just entered the conversation. Nia opened the box with shaking hands. Inside lay indigo thread, old earrings, a leather-wrapped bundle, and beneath them, sealed papers. Baraka had been right. The record existed. Nia held it up. The clerk took it, read, then read again. The room went completely still. And before anyone could reshape the lie, another voice sounded from the doorway. "Read it aloud." Prince Jelani had arrived. He stood there with Baraka and 2 royal guards in plain travel wear. The daylight behind them made the room suddenly feel much smaller. Kasim rose so quickly he nearly stumbled. Sifu went pale. Zola did not move at all. The clerk, now trembling, read the inheritance protection aloud before witnesses. When he finished, nobody spoke. Because there are moments when truth enters a room like fire, and every lie inside it understands at once that it cannot survive. What followed should have ended matters. The document was clear. The heir was named. The land could not be transferred without Nia's consent. But Zola was not the kind of woman who placed all her hope on one trap. When Sifu and the clerk retreated from the house in humiliation, she did not scream. She did not beg. She did not deny. She watched. And that evening, after the compound had fallen into uneasy silence, Nia found a folded note under her sleeping mat. If the riverbank cannot be taken by paper, it will be taken by shame. Be at the river tomorrow, and keep your secrets there. There was no signature. There did not need to be. Nia understood immediately. Zola knew about the dawn meetings. If she spread word that Nia had been secretly meeting a strange man in the forest, village tongues would do what fire does in dry season. Even innocence can look guilty when fear begins telling the story. Nia took the note straight to Jelani the next morning. He read it once and handed it to Baraka. Baraka's eyes darkened. "Then she means to attack your name." Jelani said nothing for a while. Then he asked Nia a question she did not expect. "Do you trust me enough to let the truth come publicly?" Nia looked at him. Trust was not something she gave quickly. Trust had cost her too much in life to be offered like fruit. But everything had already become public in one way or another. Hiding now would not protect her. "Yes," she said. Jelani nodded. "Then let her speak." The plan that followed was simple. 3 days later, Bukuru would gather under the baobab for the Moon Rest Market, the monthly evening assembly where disputes, trade matters, and public announcements were heard before elders and witnesses. If Zola wanted shame to do her work, she would be given the rope to use. Only she would not be the one deciding where it tightened. On the day of the assembly, the entire village gathered early. Women sat on woven mats, men stood in clusters, children ran until their mothers hissed them back. Lanterns were hung from poles, smoke from grilled maize drifted through the square. Kasim came wearing his cleanest robe. Nia came with her head high. Zola came dressed in sorrow, which for manipulative people is often the most expensive outfit they own. And Prince Jelani came last, not in plain clothing, but in full royal colors. The reaction spread through the crowd like wind through grass. People stood. Some bowed. Others simply stared. Zola's face remained composed, but a thin line appeared beside her mouth. The head elder, Mama Chiku, struck her staff once against the ground. "Let the matter be spoken." Zola rose first. She bowed dramatically to the assembly and began in a trembling voice designed to sound wounded rather than cruel. "I have endured much in silence," she said. "I tried to protect my husband's home. I tried to guide a stubborn girl. But now I must speak, because the honor of this family has been dragged through the forest." Murmurs moved through the crowd. She turned and pointed toward Nia. "This girl has been meeting a man in secret before dawn. She has been slipping away from the house and bringing disgrace upon the name of her father." A sharper murmur now. Kasim flinched. Nia did not move. Zola continued, gathering force from each lie. She spoke of disobedience, of suspicious absences, of hidden intentions, of how she, as a wife trying to protect the household, had been attacked for merely caring too much. It was a polished performance. For a few moments, it nearly worked. Then Mama Chiku lifted her staff again. "You say she met a man," the elder said. "Name him." Zola turned toward the royal platform, perhaps hoping the prince would stay silent, perhaps not yet realizing that the trap she had chosen had already changed ownership. Prince Jelani rose to his feet. "I am the man," he said. The square fell silent so completely that even the goats seemed to stop moving. Jelani stepped down from the platform and into the center of the gathering. His voice was calm, but it carried the kind of authority that makes denial sound foolish before it begins. "I met Nia by the river while investigating illegal record tampering tied to the Eastern Riverbank inheritance. I returned because her testimony aligned with evidence already under review by the royal court." He paused. "I met her openly, in the sight of the morning sky. I met her honorably. And if shame is to be spoken tonight, let it be placed where it belongs." Then Baraka came forward with documents. Real documents. Copies from district records. Witness statements. The clerk's signed confession that Sifu had paid for a false debt notice. An inventory of taxes Kasim had already paid, proving the claimed debt had been invented, and a complaint filed by 2 widows from another village, stating that Sifu had previously tried similar tricks on their family plots. The lie broke apart in public. Not slowly. All at once. Sifu tried to leave the square. Royal guards stopped him. The crowd turned toward Zola. And for the first time since entering Kasim's house, she looked like a woman who had finally discovered that intelligence without mercy can still lose. "What do you say to these charges?" Mama Chiku asked. Zola's eyes moved quickly from face to face, measuring exits that no longer existed. "I did what was necessary," she said at last, her voice losing its softness. "A house cannot survive on mourning and memory. Kasim is weak. The girl is young. Someone had to think ahead." There it was. Not apology, not innocence. Contempt. She had not stolen because she was desperate. She had stolen because she believed other people's grief made them unfit to keep what was theirs. Kasim stood then. His hands were shaking. His voice was not. "For 3 years," he said, "I have lived beside a stranger and called her wife." No one interrupted him. He looked at Nia, then at the ground, then back at the crowd. "My daughter lost her mother. Then she lost her peace. And I watched too much in silence." The words seemed to cost him something deep and painful. "I cannot return what my silence took from her, but I can refuse 1 more day of it." He turned to Zola. "Leave my house." The square exhaled. Some stories do not turn because a prince speaks. They turn because the person who has been sleeping inside shame finally wakes up. Zola looked at Kasim, as if she had never believed he would find a spine strong enough to oppose her. Perhaps she had not. Sifu shouted then, accusing the court, accusing the prince, accusing everyone except himself. The guards seized him by the arms. The district clerk fell to his knees before the elder and began confessing faster than anyone asked questions. Women in the crowd whispered Adana's name. Old men shook their heads. Children stared with the stunned fascination children have when the adults around them suddenly reveal the true size of their hidden wars. Mama Chiku raised both hands and spoke the ruling into the night. The false debt was void. The transfer attempt was void. The riverbank and spring rights remained under Nia's protected inheritance. Sifu would be taken for formal judgment in Kitembo. The clerk would answer for corruption. And Zola, having manipulated the household and attempted unlawful seizure of lineage land, would be expelled from Kasim's home, pending district review. When the elder finished, the lantern flames flickered in the wind, and the square seemed to breathe again. Zola did not weep. Women like her rarely weep when exposed. They harden. She gathered her wrapper, lifted her chin, and walked out of the assembly with all the dignity she could still manufacture. But dignity cannot be worn convincingly once truth has stripped the room. Nia watched her go. She expected triumph. What came instead was something quieter. Relief. The kind that arrives not like singing, but like unclenching. Jelani stepped toward her, but not too close. He had learned that closeness with Nia was something earned, not assumed. "It is over," he said softly. Nia looked at the night sky beyond the lanterns. "No," she replied. "It has only stopped hiding." Jelani studied her for a moment, and in his expression was a respect deeper than admiration. He was looking not at a victim rescued, but at a woman who had walked through humiliation without surrendering the shape of herself. And that changes the way honorable men love. Zola left the compound the next morning. She took the clothes she had brought, the brass bowls she claimed were hers, and every last scrap of pride she could gather into her bundles. She did not touch Adana's things. This time, she did not dare. Sifu was escorted to Kitembo in chains of legal consequence, if not yet of iron. The clerk, terrified of prison, confessed enough to expose 2 additional land schemes in nearby districts. What had started as one girl's suffering opened into a wider rot the crown could no longer ignore. Prince Jelani's dawn investigation had uncovered more than a family betrayal. It had uncovered a pattern. Widows pressured off land, heirs hidden from records, illiterate craftsmen tricked into surrendering property with thumbprints placed where signatures should have been explained. For weeks after the assembly, royal messengers rode between villages collecting testimony. And in Bukuru, life began the slow, difficult work of becoming honest again. Kasim repaired the workshop roof with his own hands. He reopened the leather tables. He stopped eating in silence and started asking Nia ordinary questions again, the kind fathers should ask daughters when fear is not standing between them. Did she sleep well? Was the grain enough? Had the stitching thread arrived from market? Ordinary questions. Sometimes healing begins there. One evening, while the sun reddened behind the hills, Kasim brought Adana's wooden box to Nia and set it in her lap. "I should have given this back long ago," he said.
Nia ran her fingers across the carved lid. "What made you keep it from me?"
she asked, not bitterly, just honestly. Kasim lowered his head. "Part of me feared that opening it would mean admitting your mother was truly gone. And part of me," he paused, "part of me became a coward in my own house." Nia did not answer immediately. She opened the box and lifted the indigo thread, the earrings, the lineage papers, the little objects that make absence unbearable because they prove someone once touched the world with their hands. Then she said, "A coward is someone who never turns back. You turned back." Kasim began to cry. Not loudly, not theatrically. Quietly, like a man finally letting grief and shame leave through the same door. Nia put the box aside and held his hand. Behind them, the baobab leaves moved in the evening wind, and for the first time in many years, the compound did not feel watched by fear. 36:20. What the Prince Chose. Jelani could have returned to the palace and left the story there. Princes are often trained to move on after resolving problems, to let justice be enough, to treat suffering as something corrected rather than something remembered. But he did not move on. He kept coming to Bukuru, sometimes officially to oversee the record investigations, sometimes unofficially, at dawn, to walk beside the river where the story had begun. He no longer arrived in disguise. The village knew him now. Children followed his horse, old women inspected his manners, men straightened when he passed. Yet when he met Nia by the river, he still became something simpler than a prince. A man listening. A man asking. A man unlearning the palace habit of speaking first. On one such morning, when the sky was silver and the river looked like beaten metal, Nia said, "Did you know on the first day?" "Know what?" "That you would stay involved." Jelani smiled slightly. "No." "What did you know?" He considered the question with unusual seriousness. "I knew that anyone sent before sunrise with a vessel that could not hold water was standing inside someone else's cruelty. And I knew I would not respect myself if I rode away." Nia looked down at the new calabash in her hands, the one she now used each morning. Strong, smooth, whole. "My mother used to say," she murmured, "that some people enter your life like rain. They leave quickly, but they still change the soil." Jelani's gaze rested on her for a quiet moment. "And what am I?" he asked. Nia turned toward him, and for the first time since they met, the answer in her face came before the answer in her mouth. "You are not rain," she said. "Rain falls and goes. You came back." For a prince raised among formal promises and strategic alliances, the softness of that sentence meant more than praise. It meant he had been seen, not as a title, not as a rescuer, as a man. And love that begins there has roots. With legal protection restored, Mia reopened the eastern riverbank fields that had once belonged to her mother's line. The underground spring was real, just as the old records said. Even in heat, water rose clear and cold from the stone wellhead, half buried under weeds. The land, neglected but not dead, responded quickly to care. Women from Bukuru and nearby villages came to help clear it. Some had known Adana, some had only heard stories. Together they repaired shade racks, rebuilt the crushing stones, and planted fresh indigo seedlings where the earth was darkest. Soon the old songs returned too, shyly at first, then stronger, until blue-stained hands and laughing voices once again filled the riverbank with work that sounded like restoration. Nia stood among them one afternoon with colour on her palms and sunlight on her face, and an old woman named Binta said to no one in particular, "Her mother would have smiled today." The words entered Nia like warmth, not because she needed to become Adana, but because she no longer had to live as though Adana's legacy were something people could steal by hiding papers and controlling rooms. Some inherit gold, some inherit cattle. Nia had inherited responsibility, memory, and the right to stand where her mother had stood without asking permission. That is a kind of wealth too. Jelani visited the dye fields once during harvest time. He arrived with 2 attendants, dismissed them at the path, and walked the rest of the way alone. When he saw the cloth hanging in rows to dry, deep blue moving in the wind like strips of twilight, he stopped. "It is beautiful," he said. Nia, kneeling beside a rinsing basin, glanced up. "It is work." He smiled. The best beautiful things usually are. She handed him a strip of dyed cloth. "Then hold this and earn your compliment." He took it without complaint, and the women nearby, pretending not to listen, smiled into their work. Months passed. Sifu was tried in Kitembo and ordered to repay fraud gains taken from multiple families. The corrupt clerk lost his post and became the kind of warning parents mention to sons who admire easy money. Zola, when called before district judgment, defended herself with all the intelligence that had once helped her manipulate others. But intelligence cannot always save a person from the consequences of choosing harm on purpose. She was barred from managing inheritance matters, fined heavily, and sent away from Bakuru under public record. People expected Nia to celebrate. She did not. She was not cruel enough to enjoy collapse just because collapse had once been aimed at her. When someone asked why she looked so calm after winning, Nia answered, "Justice is not the same thing as revenge. If you confuse them, your heart stays tied to the people who hurt you." That answer traveled. By the time it reached Kitembo, even palace women were repeating it. Jelani heard it from Baraka and said nothing, but he smiled for a very long time afterward. Then, one evening at the start of the second rains, he came to Kasim's compound dressed not in royal ceremony, but in respectful simplicity. He carried no scroll and no officer's staff, only a carved wooden case. Kasim met him beneath the baobab. Nia stood near the doorway, suddenly aware that the air itself seemed to be waiting. Jelani bowed first to Kasim, then to Nia. "I have come," he said, "not as investigator and not as prince first, but as a man who wishes to ask honorably." He opened the carved case. Inside lay 2 things: a bracelet worked in silver and blue indigo thread, and a small royal token that signified serious intention before formal betrothal talks. Kasim looked from the case to his daughter. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Kasim said the most important sentence he had said in years. "The answer belongs to her. Not to grief, not to custom, not to fear, to her." Jelani turned to Nia. "I will not ask you to leave your inheritance behind," he said. "I will not ask you to become smaller so palace walls can feel comfortable. I ask only this. Would you allow me to build a future with you? One that honors what you carry, rather than replacing it?" Nia looked at him for a long time. She thought of the leaking calabash, the dark river, the mornings of caution, the night of exposure, the work in the fields, her father's tears. The strange, quiet courage of being loved by someone who never asked her to forget who she was in order to be chosen. "Yes," she said. Jelani exhaled only then, as if even a prince had not been certain what mercy the future would grant him. And beneath the baobab, with the evening wind moving through the branches above them, a story that had begun in concealment turned openly toward joy. Their wedding did not happen quickly. That, too, mattered. This was not a story where one act of rescue erased all wounds. Nia remained in Bukuru through another planting season. She rebuilt the dye trade. Kasim trained 2 younger apprentices. Agreements were drawn to ensure the eastern riverbank would remain under protected stewardship. Jelani visited often, and each visit made their bond less dramatic and more valuable. For drama is easy. Steadiness is rare. When the wedding finally came, it was held at the edge of the restored fields, just after the indigo harvest. Cloths of deep blue hung from wooden frames. Women sang old lineage songs. Children raced between stools. Kasim stood straighter than anyone had seen him stand in years. And before Nia stepped forward, she paused beside the river, where everything had once nearly been taken from her. She held in her hands the old broken calabash Zola had sent her with that first morning. Kasim had found it later among the reeds and brought it home, thinking she might want to throw it away. But Nia had kept it. Now she set it gently on a stone by the bank, not as a memory of pain, as proof. Proof that what was meant to humiliate her had become the doorway to exposure, justice, and love. When she turned from the river and walked toward the gathering, the morning sun caught the silver in her bracelet and the blue in her dress. Jelani waited beneath a canopy of woven reeds and indigo cloth, not as the stranger in the mist anymore, but as the man who had returned, until trust grew roots. The people of Bukuru remembered many things from that year. They remembered the public shame of Zola's plot. They remembered the royal reforms that followed Sifu's fraud. They remembered the return of Adana's dye fields. But most of all, they remembered this. A girl was sent away before dawn, with something broken in her hands. The people who sent her thought that if they delayed her long enough, they could empty her future. Instead, the river carried her into the path of truth. And truth, once it has seen your face, does not always leave you where it found you. So, if you ever feel as though someone is using silence, confusion, or fear to push you out of your own life, remember Nia of Bukuru. Remember that not every trap ends where the trapper intends. Remember that what is hidden can still be uncovered. Remember that dignity survives longer than deception. And remember this final lesson. A broken vessel may reveal the cruelty of the hand that gave it, but it can never decide the value of the person forced to carry it. Because some people are not destroyed by what they endure. Some people are revealed. And once they are revealed, the world cannot pretend not to see them.